The bruise filled the display like a slow sunset, purple collapsing into yellow at the edges, spreading across a face built for confidence. 4 arms folded on Dean Hargrove's desk below it. 17 formal complaints. 42 messages from parents. One question nobody in the room could yet answer: how a girl barely 5.5 feet tall had put a champion athlete on the floor of a physics classroom in under 3 seconds. "Explain it to me," the dean said, her compound eyes rotating between Vakran and the footage. Perfect academic file. No martial background on record. Average everything on her entrance physical. And she disassembles a combat athlete like flipping a switch. Vakran didn't have paperwork for an answer yet. What he had was 3 days of memory, starting in a classroom with viewports full of storm orange gas giant, teaching probability across 11 dimensions to 42 students who mostly wanted the lecture over. Riley Nakamura sat up front, small and precise, hands moving through the holographic lattice like she'd built the mathematics herself. Marcus Webb sat in back, mining family money in his voice before he'd said a word, watching sports highlights instead of equations. When Vakran called on him, he offered an answer wrong in the specific, satisfying way of someone who'd never once been corrected. Riley's hand went up before Vakran could respond. She didn't just fix the mistake. She rebuilt it clean and complete, the kind of answer that made teaching worth the pay cut. Marcus didn't take correction well. His skin went the mottled red human faces do when pride takes a hit, and he told her, loud enough for the room, that memorizing a textbook wasn't the same as understanding one. Riley turned to face him with a stillness Vakran would later call unsettling in his report. She told him evenly that she didn't memorize, she understood, and applied, and that he might try it sometime instead of coasting on what his father's donations had bought him. The room went silent in the way that precedes either a breakthrough or a catastrophe. Marcus came up out of his chair, so fast it slammed the desk behind him. 3 steps toward her, fists already closed. Vakran registered, with the detached horror of a teacher watching a demonstration go wrong, that they were seconds from violence in a classroom orbiting a gas giant, and did nothing but watch as Riley rose to meet him, unhurried, sleeves already rolled to her elbows, boots reinforced at the toe as if she dressed for this before it happened. She told him his seat in the course was a purchase, not an achievement, and that looming over her was as useless as it was predictable. Marcus swung. What followed took less time to occur than it takes to describe. Riley stepped inside the punch instead of away from it, redirected his arm with one hand, and drove the heel of the other into his diaphragm with a sound like a mallet finding wet clay. The air left him in one long collapse. Before he'd finished falling, she'd caught his arm, turned her hip into his momentum, and sent him face first into a desk. He came up bleeding, tried to grab her, grappling instinct, textbook reflex, and she was already gone from where he reached, her hand catching the side of his neck hard enough to scramble his balance without breaking anything. He staggered, caught a desk, stood there confused and afraid in a way his family's money had never let him feel before. Vakran's voice, full volume, finally cut through. Enough. Riley stepped back immediately, hands loose, breathing even, as if she'd just answered a question correctly. Marcus stayed in his stance, shaking, blood dripping onto the floor, already shouting that she'd started it. The classroom's recorders disagreed with him in perfect clarity, and by the time Vakran replayed the footage for the room, several students were laughing at a boy who had just filmed his own downfall. That same footage was what now hung in Dean Hargrove's office, a purple bloom of consequence nobody had planned for. "The Webb family wants blood," the dean continued, folding 2 more hands atop the first 2. "Other families want reassurance, and Galactic Oversight wants to know why 5 separate incidents this cycle all ended with a human standing and someone else on the floor, every one of them, by the footage, provoked by the other side." "They're not starting fights," Vakran said. "They're finishing them. That is precisely the problem I need solved." He agreed to speak with Riley for the official file, where she'd learned this, whether other human students carried the same capability unlogged. He found her 2 days later on the observation deck, off hours, alone with a data pad in her lap, watching storms churn across bands of red and orange the size of continents. "The Dean wants to know where you learned to fight," he said, easing onto a bench built for a species with no spine to speak of. "My grandmother." Riley didn't look up. "Special operations, 20 years before she retired and started teaching me instead of soldiers. I was 6. Not forms, how to fall without breaking, where a body gives out, how to use someone's weight against them. The rest I taught myself. Combat's just physics with consequences. It's all written down somewhere, if you know where to look." "You'd never used any of it before Marcus?" "No." She met his eyes now, and there was nothing performed in the directness. First time the theory needed a body. Something cold settled in Vakran's thorax, a weapon kept loaded for years on nothing but discipline. You had the control to stop him without breaking anything. Why the injury? "The nose was the message," she said. "So he doesn't try it twice, so nobody watching does either. That's calculation, not defense. It's arithmetic." A pause, and something under her voice shifted, thinned. "My grandmother made me promise something before she died. Never start it. Never let it happen to me a second time because I hesitated the first." Her tone stayed level, but the loss showed through anyway. She used to say her service protected people for a moment. Teaching protects them for good because it hands them the tool instead of just the rescue. "And if it happens again?" "I give them a chance to walk first," Riley said, without hesitation. "But if hands go on me, I stop it. That's not menace. That's math." Vakran sat with that long after she'd returned to her homework, more restful in front of the storms than he'd expected. He thought of a species that had clawed its way off a planet, actively trying to kill it, that had turned survival into a discipline passed from one hand to the next, like a family trade nobody chose, but everybody kept. His report reached Dean Hargrove the next morning, alongside 4 other quiet altercations from the past 2 cycles. Everyone started by someone else, everyone ending the same way. The Dean's answer, when it came, surprised no one who'd watched the footage. Mandatory personal safety training, station-wide, human students teaching beside instructors from a dozen worlds. Not a liability. A resource, finally put to use in daylight, instead of surfacing only in emergencies. The Webb family's complaints dissolved within a season. Pressing them meant re-airing exactly how their son had ended up on the floor. Marcus returned from suspension quieter, careful now about who he provoked, and stayed that way. He graduated into corporate management 2 cycles later, known, oddly, for treating subordinates with more patience than the job required. Riley graduated at the top of her year, recruited by 3 research institutes and a military think tank, and chose the research institute working on defensive applications of quantum theory. Because of course she did. Give a human a theory, and they'll find the version of it that keeps someone alive. Vakran still teaches. On the last day of a term, months after the hearing that started it all, he passes the training deck and sees Riley guiding a young Vathi student through the same hip turn that once put Marcus face first into a desk, slower now, patient, correcting a stance instead of ending a fight. The student overbalances, catches herself exactly the way she was shown, and comes up grinning, startled at what her own body just proved it could do. Riley runs her through it twice more before she's satisfied, then steps back and calls the next student forward.